This is a string guide for one-piece string using the universal round-the-world method for a racket with a 16 by 19 string pattern. And some of the tools that we need for stringing a tennis racket are the pick, a starting clamp, a nose plier, and a cutter. And these are the basic tools that you need for a string job. I'll be stringing the Wilson Flash B100 in the video. And to start off, we will need to mount the racket onto the machine, starting with the top and bottom points of the racket. Tighten it with the knobs at the side of the machine just enough to hold the racket in place. Then tighten the knobs or the other mounts to hold the sides of the racket. And it is good to make sure that the racket is tightened enough not to move around while stringing. And please note not to over tighten the racket onto the machine, as the racket may warp or crack even before you start string. The strings that we are using today is the Solinco Hyper G from a reel. So strings from a reel for a one-piece string job, we will need about 11 to 11.5 meters of strings depending on the head size of the racket. Another tip is that the string could use a light coat of lubricant like Vaseline to reduce the friction between the strings while pulling them across one another. But just apply a light coat and not overdo it, as the strings may slip. Okay, once the racket has been secured and the strings have been measured out, we can finally start the string. So pull the string through the center two grommets. And for the round-the-world method, we have a long side and a short side like most one-piece stringing job. The short side would be about 3 meters or 10 feet, and the long side would be about 9 meters or 30 feet. And it's always good to mark out how long is the shorter side so we know how much to pull through the center two grommets. So to start, I'll start off by pulling the tension on the shorter side. So I would need to clamp the string on the longer side and use a starting clamp for additional support if the swivel clamp slips. Once your clamp has been secured, I will start to pull the tension on the mains on the short side. So I will pull about 3 mains and then alternate to the long side, 6, and then back to the short side. Always string on alternate sides after a few pulls to make sure that the pressure on the head is evenly distributed so the racket doesn't warp as much. Tip is to always try to clamp the strings as close to the racket frame as possible to minimize any uneven tension on the mains when pulling tension. One of the reasons why most stringers prefer a two-piece string job as compared to a one-piece string job is that there are more strings needed to pass through while using the one-piece stringing method, and the strings may tangle and may be a hassle to deal with while stringing.
Always try to grab onto the end of the long side to avoid wasting time on finding the end while stringing. Always tuck off the ends into the grommet so that I do not need to spend time looking for it later on.
Need to string all the mains on the long side and leave the last main on the short side for the top cross.
After the last main on the long side has been pulled, always put the end of the long side through the grommet first, and with that you may need some help from the trusty nose plier if the string does not go through easily, and cutting the string at an angle is helpful to help the string pass through as well.
Now we would need to weave and pull the tension on the top cross using the short side, but after pulling the tension we would need to hold the tension of top cross using the starting clamps, as we will need the other two clamps or crosses moving forward. Another tip for stringing the around the world method is to always check the weave pattern of the racket before cutting off the strings. Generally, the rule of thumb is that a racket with an odd number of crosses will have the same weave for the first and last cross, while a racket with an even number of crosses will have opposite weave for the first and last cross. So for this clash, we have a 16 by 19 pattern, so it would be the same weave for the top and bottom cross. Once we've held the tension of the top cross with a starting clamp, we can go ahead to weave the bottom cross with the long side of the string and then pull the tension on it, and then put the string through the grommets for the last main on the short side, pulling the tension. Tip for pulling the last main on the short side is to leave enough space between the clamp and the grommet for the fourth cross to be able to string one ahead without any hindrance moving forward, which I made a mistake while stringing this particular racket, leaving not enough space for me to string one ahead, but it's just a small setback and doesn't make much of a difference. But it's always good to leave enough space for one ahead. Now that we went around the racket, the strings, we can start to string the crosses from top down. And it's always good to push the strings upwards towards the empty side while passing the strings through the mains. Also, try to string one ahead so that you will not be hindered by the clamps while weaving for the next cross.
So, because I did not leave enough space between the clamps and the fourth cross grommet earlier on, I'll need to pull tension on the second and third cross before I can continue to string one ahead.
Another good tip to follow is to try to straighten the strings as much as possible while pulling tension on the crosses to ensure a more dynamic and consistent tension throughout the racket. You may cut off the excess strings if you find there is too much strings passing through one another while doing the crosses. And by doing so, you will reduce the amount of friction each string have to go through while the racket is being strung. So once all the crosses have been completed, it is time to do the tie-off. And always pull an additional 10% tension on the tie-off cross to reduce the tension loss. You can use any knot you're comfortable with as long as the tie-off is secure. So for me personally, I use the double half hitch knot. You can use any knot that you're comfortable with, be it it's a parnell knot or 1.5 hitch knot. It's entirely your personal preference. One tip for the tie-off is to always find the tie-off grommet, and it's usually one that has a bigger opening for the string to pass through more easily for you to do the tie-off.
It is also important to note not to over tighten the knot as it may cause a premature break on the strings.
So once the tie-off on the last cross is completed, release the clamps on the bottom and move the clamp up the second cross before releasing the starting clamp to pull tension on the first cross and do the same tie-off. Some of the stringers may tie off the top cross after stringing a few of the crosses on top. And as long as you have one clamp holding the tension of the cross, you can do a tie off safely. And it's really up to your personal preference whether you want to do a tie off or not. For me, I prefer to do it all at once at the end when I'm done with pulling all the tension on the strings. And to finish off the string job, release the clamps holding any of your strings and straighten your strings one last time before releasing the racket from the machine. And then you're done with the string job. I'll show you two examples of the rackets with different string pattern and positioning of the grommet. So for the Wilson Thunderbird, it has a 16 by 18 string pattern with two skips on the grommet. That means it could be strung with the universal around the world method. So for this yellowhead racket, it has a 16 by 19 string pattern and only skips one grommet. So it's best if it's strung with two pieces rather than one piece. And that would be all. Thank you.